Hey, welcome everyone to another edition of Sci-Fi. Happy Friday, everyone! And yeah, we're really happy to be joined this week by Nolen Gertz, who's a professor at University of Twente. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Twente. There you go. First time. And in kind of media, has a real history in kind of media and communication studies. Fantastic book, Technology and Nihilism, which came out with MIT Press a few years ago, and several recent articles dealing with very contemporary ways in which technology requires thinking philosophically and transforms kind of what it means to live and feel in today's society. So something that's been kind of close to our discussions on this show before. And so we're going to talk about things like deepfakes. Nolan's got a new recent article on deepfakes. We're going to talk about social media and the question of Zoom and conference calling and basically these kinds of technology which have emerged really exploded in the last sort of 2 years and what to kind of make of them. So thanks for joining us, Nolen. Really looking forward to it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great picture of your book there behind you. Is that the Japanese edition there or something?
Yeah, I felt immediately compelled to blow it up to poster size.
And a great cover anyway. I mean, let's start with this question of deepfakes. And in a way, it's interesting because I was thinking, well, this oddly isn't like a kind of, headline grabbing topic. If we called this YouTube video like, psychoanalysis of deepfakes, I wondered if that would like be a kind of successful kind of clickbait strategy. And then I read your article and realized actually this is kind of what you're saying. Like one of the things you're saying about deepfakes is how weird it is that we don't care that much about them, right?
Exactly.
So why don't you tell us about that kind of position? What do you think went on with this kind of? I mean, they were in the news for a few minutes, right?
Yeah. I did an interview with Al Jazeera a couple years ago when I think it was Channel 4 was doing a deep fake of Queen Elizabeth as sort of both a joke and an example of what to be worried about. And again, it's this kind of thing that philosophers of technology, philosophers of epistemology thought, this is the end. We can't trust video anymore. Video is the requirement for trusting anything. So if we can't even have video to rely upon, it'll be chaos in the streets, cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. And instead, it, like you said, it became sort of a passing fad. There was a deep fake of Zelensky saying, put down your weapons. And everyone just immediately was like, well, that was a pretty bad fake, so brush it off, move on. So this is what I found kind of fascinating, because it seemed like the philosophical arguments about why this should create what they called epistemic chaos or infopocalypse. They made really good arguments. They were compelling. We really do require video for a lot of our lives and for a lot of our trust in reality. And yet the idea that they could be fake, that you could be talking to not me right now, but to an algorithm, nobody really cares. So of course this linked up with my interest in nihilism.
Right. I mean, let's come on to that. So like, like you said, you've written this book on nihilism, but I don't know what happened there, but
Now you're back.
What happened there? I just cut out for a second.
Yeah.
Tell us what explains this, because from your views, I think you're just coming to, your why the question of this. I mean, it's really interesting. You talked about how more people search for avocado than deep fake and things like that. Like what like obviously, what does this show us about our society today? But yeah, why does this reveal a kind of nihilism in contemporary culture, should we say?
Yeah, well, I guess on the one hand, you could argue we're a deeply avocado obsessed society, but I think it's much more likely that as I tried to argue, that basically we're attention driven and deepfakes. So this is my criticism of the other philosophical accounts, was that they sort of took for granted that the arms race in deepfakes was between the people trying to trick you and the people trying to catch the tricksters. And And instead, I think it's really between the deepfake creators and the all other content creators on Instagram. So Kim Kardashian is a greater weapon against deepfakes than any algorithm driven by academic or government resources. So I think there is sort of this war, sort of Hobbesian war of all against all on social media, but it's not life or death in the traditional sense. It's life or death in the attention sense.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that strikes me as being an important point, and I suppose it's. I mean, I suppose this is why you started with this funny example of DeepNudes, right? So tell us what this does, and then I'll ask the question about it.
Right. So this gentleman who preferred to be called Alberto was a lover of these 1960s comic book advertisements of X-ray glasses. I remember these from my youth as well. And again, this idea that you could see women's clothing, you could basically just walk around and amuse yourself. And he said that he realized when he learned about algorithms that could turn nighttime image into daytime image through these adversarial networks of basically trying to trick each other, catching what it failed on, and then learning from that. So this is a deep learning algorithm. That he could use this as well to take a dressed photo and turn it into a nude photo. Shockingly, it only worked for women because, again, deep learning requires a library of imagery. So basically, if you dump the internet stock of pornography into an algorithm, it can basically figure out to the best of its ability what a woman would look like if she were naked. And this is
you can't get a naked man from the entire library of internet pornography. The algorithm can't figure out a naked man still.
I think that was listed as a coming soon feature.
A coming soon feature, right?
I mean, let's just speculate as to why that might be. I mean, there's so many different points to say about that. I think one is obviously that, when we use data sets, whether that's images or whatever, to build a piece of technology, it inherits a number of kind of, biases or assumptions from the culture which that data set is drawn. So clearly it points to all sorts of problems with the way in which data-driven stuff is created. But then just on the sort of anecdotal level, it's kind of true that, like, I suppose what that points to is that there's a kind of uniformity in the way in which pornography represents the woman's body, whereas because there are men on screen, but they don't necessarily match in the same way.
Right.
So it makes it more difficult for the algorithm to predict. That's quite shocking, really, if you think about it like that.
Yeah, I think there's also probably the degree to which Alberto understood his audience. And so it's probably not exactly motivated to create those kind of images.
But I mean, and let me come back to your point rather than taking it off. But to talk about pornography, although I've been actually doing research on virtual reality pornography, which is also bizarre and interesting, and kind of related to this question, I suppose. But to go back to your point about this kind of attention economy, and this is a perfect example, really, because as you say, it's somebody realizing, actually, I can go viral here, right? I can compete with Kim Kardashian by, doing this, releasing this thing or using these images to create. So it all comes down to this kind of like question of, as you said, we're being told to think about it in a certain way when it's another way. And in your article, you actually use Heidegger to kind of think this through, right? You say that you use his kind of argument that when we are just thinking about what technologies do, we're blind to their real power. So deepfakes would be a good example, right? We're constantly talking about, look what it can do. It can actually make Obama say, this, when actually the bigger picture here is something much more broad about the way in which we relate to them and so on. And then you you also talk about the difference between, or how like we're watching a cat on a little cute cat on YouTube or whatever, and we say I'm watching a cat instead of saying I'm watching a recording that was uploaded to an online platform which shows a particular digital kind of rendering of a cat. So take us through this argument really, and how like Heidegger kind of helps us to see here like what's important about the technology is not necessarily just what it does, let's say.
Yeah. So already in his early work, Being in Time, he talks about this famous example of the hammer, and you can see I have a hammer behind me, as all philosophers of technology must. And again, this idea that in hammering, we become, as he puts it, so absorbed in our project that the hammer itself sort of disappears. It just becomes an extension of the hand, right? So again, you'd say I'm hammering, not I'm using a hammer to hammer. And this becomes, in the work of Don Idy and others, what is called post-phenomenology, this idea of studying how technologies are not neutral. They're not mere instruments, mere tools, but actually actively shape how we experience the world, how we experience the reality. So again, the idea that, as you said, when I'm watching a video, I focus on the content, but not as content, but as reality itself. So I would say that right now I'm talking to you and Eliot, but really I'm talking to a computer, talking to a network, talking to your computer. And I have no idea in the chain between you and me what actually gets to you, right? So again, there's sort of a deep faith operating. As much as we like to claim we're all atheists, and I'm wearing one of mine today. Again, the idea that there's a lot of faith riding on the internet. The other argument from Heidegger that we take in his 1954 essay, The Question Concerning Technology, is this idea that there's a break between ancient and modern technology. And in modern technology, everything is being reduced to what he calls standing reserve, to mere stock, turning nature into a battery. And the idea is that we are tricked because of that into thinking that we're the masters of this, instead of realizing the degree to which we are ourselves being reduced to this stock as well. What today we, of course, call content. So again, what deepfakes help to reveal is the degree to which all of us are content, and that deepfake is basically just manipulating content, no different from any other content, which is again why it's just competing with every other content creator. In the same way, again, that it reveals that Obama is no less content than you or I.
So are you saying that we think we're talking about post-phenomenology, but what we're essentially doing, or the main component of what we are doing, is reproducing content? Is there no using this technology to overcome this kind of, like you wrote, epistemological bias, right?
Yeah, I think we all like to pretend that we're doing the real work and that others are content creators, but we are all very aware of the likes, retweets, subscriptions, and it drives you whether you want to admit it or not, right? So in an interesting way, it's the Instagram influencers who are perhaps the most honest of us, right? They are the ones yelling, smash that like button.
Yeah.
While the rest of us are posting videos of our lectures online, saying no, this is part of a Socratic dialogue. We're continuing an ancient tradition.
Right.
But no,
smash that like button.
Yeah, smash that like
button. Right.
Yeah, I mean, it occurs. I'm sure Eliot has more on this as well, but it occurs to me that this is actually a kind of connection between the two articles that we were going to talk about. Like, because what you just said about the kind of question of faith, right, and the question of how much faith has to exist for like the digital world to function, and I'd like to sort of at some point come on to like the sort of politics of that, I suppose, and who that faith is actually in, but it's kind of also related to your arguments about zooming through a crisis, you put it, right? So like how we then become, how, like you said, you use this call as an example, but you've also recently written about how this kind of question of zooming like, you know, and I can't remember what it was, the sale, the rise of Zoom, let's say. But
I
like
thought this was an interesting thesis, the Zoom thesis about at-homeness in terms of this like tension between like, we're free, but these constraints of the home enjoyment. I don't think I really have thought about the dangers of home enjoyment so much.
Yeah. Well, tell us, for like the listeners' sake, what this is, what this question of home enjoyment means, Nolen.
Yeah, so I was interesting this idea that, you know, we had to move thanks to COVID into quarantine, and yet people like Ian Bogus, for example, pointed out we were already living in quarantine. We were well prepared to make this move. We already were as you often see on social media, people saying, you know, my plans for tonight got canceled. What a relief, right? This idea that I really wanted to stay in, watch Netflix, not even chill anymore, just Netflix. You know, turn off.
No chill.
Yeah, again, if anyone actually calls you on the phone, there's nothing more horrifying and traumatic. This idea that, you know, you order food in so you don't have to go out. Everything's delivered to you. We've reduced our interaction to other people with the delivery person, and this is why, of course, Amazon offers you drone delivery service as the future, because why would you want any human contact whatsoever? So again, this idea that your home becomes your sort of fortress of solitude. You have the little Trump inside you saying, build the wall. It's again this interesting idea that even with COVID restrictions going down, you see people saying, but I want to stay at home. And again, this sort of new fight, you know, this was working for 2 years. Let's keep it going. And if you say, you know, actually, I want to go back to the office, people think, oh, well, you're just a corporate drone. You've fallen for it. You know, let's all move into our home office. But again, this interesting idea that we are forgetting, and this is again what post-phenomenology and Heidegger helped to reveal. You know, how much of conversations cannot be reproduced in this video Zoom-like format. So again, the spontaneity, the body language, the uncontrollability, all of these elements get thrown out the window, and conversation just gets reduced to that which can be zoomed.
Yeah. For instance, you can't tell that Alfie's actually much taller than me in Zoom. That's what shocked me about me. I was like, whoa.
I always get that, and I feel like I must have a small man, you know, I must have a small man's personality or something, because every time I meet someone in person, the first thing they say is, "Oh my God, you're not small." But you know, what I wanted to come to in this, and then also in relation to the last thing, is this question of the power and whose it is. And in this article, you do talk about this in terms of you know, you mentioned Marx, but also talk about Andrew Feenberg's kind of ideas of technology and Zoom, and thinking about question of capitalism. I really like the idea of us as, you know, Heidegger's idea of standing reserve, right? So that what this does, in a way, it serves capitalism in the sense that it turns us all into these kind of on-demand tools, right? So that Netflix, what Netflix is to us, we are to, you know, the economy of capitalism, in a sense that we can just be called upon wherever. But so it just occurs to me to ask about that, but also to ask, you know, with this question of faith that came up in the last conversation, you know, who is this benefiting, right? Is this and are there like, yeah, I mean, because this question of faith seems really dangerous. And, you know, I mean, is it that we're putting is it giving power to like Silicon Valley? Is it giving power to a broader kind of form of capitalism? Like, what do you think this kind of situation is benefiting for the most part? Like,
yeah, I think this is, again, what thinkers in the 1950s, when philosophy of technology gets going, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that they're really kind of fascinated with how technology has taken over. And again, this question of for who. So the Marxists, it's clearly for our capitalist overlords, for the owners of the means of production, which is why they are more ambivalent, so to speak, about technology. Is it actually bad, or is it just who has control over it? But then you see people, again, like Heidegger, like Jacques Ellul, who say, no, the people in charge are just as enslaved as the rest of us to technology. And they're just as tricked by the illusion of control as the rest of us. So for Heidegger, you get this sort of weird metaphysical argument about destiny of mankind being led in this way. And Lowell says that it's really much more like a technology determinism, that it's the sort of spirit of the age of technology, that again, it leads us to reformulate our values into technological values. So, for example, efficiency for Lowell becomes, this is the dominant example. If you say, you go to an airport and you say, I have to wait for my flight, what's a good seat? A good seat is where you can plug in your phone. So it's the phone that determines what's good, not you, right? And again, this idea that this isn't oppositional for Lowell, because we have just sort of subsumed ourselves to our technologies. So if my phone says to me, I need an update, it's politely telling me, click this button or else. But increasingly, it just leaves me out of it, and I just find my phone off at some point, and it just turns back on, and I'm just there to plug it in on occasion. So again, this idea of who is this for? It's really hard to answer that, and I think this is why Lowell is also good on this concept of technocracy. That we're tricked into thinking that democracy is being technologized, but really our tech overlords are not overlords, because they have no interest in political power. So they have all the political power. Yeah. They don't want it. This has created a massive void in which people like Orban and Trump and others have sort of stepped into this void because no one else is taking the reins.
I mean, I think that that last point is a fantastic take on it. I mean, I think I totally agree. I mean, so basically, because we often heard it, didn't we? Like, oh, before we know it, Musk or Zuckerberg will be running for president or whatever, as if to imply that the ultimate goal of everyone was to become president. Although that might be Trump's, have been.
And
Trump.
the ultimate means of power is to be in charge of Facebook.
Right, exactly. Whereas in actual fact, you're looking at something quite different to that. Like, political power in the traditional sense is not what these people are after, but they are the ones with the most power. So yeah, then that leaves this kind of, I mean, I am just repeating what you've said, but I think it's worth sort of thinking it through, that sort of cleaves open this gap which can be taken advantage of, right? But for some reason, then I suppose the follow-up question then is why, now that we're coming on to this politics in this way, like, why do you think certain forces, or whether we want to call that the right or something, have been so successful in sort of taking advantage of this kind of gap in the sort of power system, instead of, say, like socialist or progressive or Marxist politics, which don't seem to have sort of grabbed that space in the same way? Is there a sort of technological reason why that's happened, or is that just the chance of where we're at?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's what I thought I was going to be writing before COVID stopped really. But the fascination for me between totalitarianism and technology, and I began the epidemic by reading Arendt's Origins of Totalitarianism again. I didn't think I would finish it before the pandemic ended. But again, this idea that totalitarianism, is obsessed with not power in traditional sense, but power to reshape reality itself. And this is how you gain adherence, because basically you're telling lies, and the people who are listening like the lie. So again, this idea that leftists and centrists, to the extent they exist, are fighting an uphill battle to the extent that they are beholden to reality. The right is not. That makes it much easier, and again creates partnership with technology companies like Zuckerberg's metaverse, where they are explicitly offering you a new reality. So again, this idea that if you say no, we need to really confront climate change. We need to really confront mass murder, guns on the streets. We really have to, people don't want to confront them. So if you said, no, everything's fine. It's just these bad people that we have to get rid of. But you're good, and nothing is wrong with you. That's a compelling story, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Lots of different ways to do the exact same thing, right? What is it that the political is a specific word? Maybe it was in the article. Whatever political story is needed to get you to do basically exactly nothing or feed into a system or something.
Yeah, and this is again something that Hannah Arendt was already aware of 70 years ago. The danger of individualism. So she talks about this idea that the world is becoming a desert of individualism, where again politics is not seen as it was for the Greeks as what it means to be human, but instead as something we want to shove off to people like Boris Johnson to deal with, so the rest of us can do whatever the hell we want with our lives, free of politics, right? So again, this idea that even among the Democrats in Congress, you saw them saying, we don't want to make this political when talking
Right.
about the recent massacre in Uvalde, Texas. So again, this idea that politics has become a dirty word. If you say you're a politician, people take that to mean liar, right? And the idea that anyone would want to run for office already gives us some sort of pause, right?
Yeah.
So again, this idea of how could we ever achieve political aims when we don't want to be political? So this is again how the right sort of wins, because they say, look, vote us into office and we'll destroy politics. And we see this very effectively happening in the United States and the United Kingdom. And then we are shocked that no one's doing anything about it when all the people who we voted into office said, I'm anti-politics.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, it's quite interesting. Sorry, Alfie.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
It's quite an interesting idea, the kind of tracing of politics to polis that you did in terms of there's this family space and then you're free. Politics is a space where you're freed up from the family space and you're into the community, and that's absolutely lost, right? This is like something that's not even a notion, I would say, in today's culture. But I think it could easily, it seems logical enough. It seems like a sound idea. Why is this kind of notion of politics and freedom together to enter into the community, why has this disappeared so thoroughly?
Yeah, I think this is again going back to your earlier question about Zoom and staying at home, right? That again, this idea of the home as the private domain that you leave to enter the public domain. That we don't want to enter the public domain.
Yeah.
And that we have pretended that internet platforms are the new public domain, right? But that's not really what's happening. Or to the extent that it is happening, it gets immediately taken over by internet trolls and the worst forms of humanity possible. So again, this idea for Hannah Arendt was that politics needs a place. It's not an activity alone. It's also an activity that takes place in a certain open space, as you put it, right? So again, this idea of do we have communities that have public squares, your Hyde Park speaking corner? In America, this has been avoided to all extents possible, so that every suburb is just McMansions, again, fortresses up against each other. My sister, for example, lives in an area where there are no sidewalks even. It's just taken for granted. You'll drive from your driveway to anywhere else you're going, and there is no even public transportation, right? So again, public transportation in America, that's for poor people. which increasingly gives the sense that anything public is for poor people. So why would you ever want to enter a public domain?
Right. Well, that is the case. That is one of the most shocking differences between the UK and,
Yeah.
I mean, a bus system. It's, if you want to take a bus in Los Angeles, it's like, well, get ready for a 2.5 hour journey, but that's what you get for not having a car. And don't be surprised if people, threaten you on there or something that in your face. This is like to be expected. Right. I mean, the public space is associated with, this is the cheap space, or this is the space where I don't want to be. In private space, that's your home, that's where you're cozy, that's where the nice things are. Right. How can that possibly be overcome if we've so thoroughly associated publicness with danger and cheapness and the antithesis of everything we value, really?
This becomes a vicious cycle, right? So in America, we not only hate the public space, we also hate paying taxes. So it's not seen as patriotic to pay your taxes. It's seen as idiotic to pay your taxes, right? Trump, the Democrats thought they were going to catch Trump by revealing he didn't pay his taxes, but really to his supporters, that just showed how brilliant he was, right? So again, this idea, you can't have public goods if you don't have taxes to support them. So the public goods fall apart. And then people say, well, look, they're falling apart. Why would I want to participate in it? So again, this idea of an endless cycle of an unwillingness to pay. And then again, in European countries are seen as the enemy by the United States as that socialism. And this is, again, why Bernie Sanders had such an uphill battle trying to say, no, look at these countries, they're really good, and then being like, oh, so you think socialism is good, and then end of discussion.
Yeah, I know. I think this is really, really important. Actually, this question, I think, of the kind of, we think the internet, I mean, I want to ask about the history of technology and the future of it, as kind of Eliot was doing as well. But this point that basically we've lost the kind of public space, but retreated into this kind of tech illusion of public space. So everyone's in a sense more public facing than normal. As you said, smash a like on the video or whatever. But on the other hand, something about the public as a sort of commons is disappearing. And it occurs to me to sort of contextualize that in the history of the internet, really, because it's fascinating that, as you said, the way you put it, Nolen, is we pretend that the internet has replaced this public space. And, in the earlier days of the internet, in the early 2000s or late 90s, this idea of the internet as a commons was actually quite sort of utopian and quite prominent. And there was this kind of idea that, in a new way, the internet would lead to new forms of communal living, new forms of discourse, a new commons, as it were. But you're saying that, and then of course we often say that never materialized, right? Instead, we live in this kind of platform capitalist internet where it's anti-democratic or whatever. But what you're saying is a sort of third position on that, like, in a way, it's an illusion of a commons or an illusion of a public space, which is given to us by technology, but which is actually kind of depoliticizing. So, like, I mean, do you agree with that kind of history of it? But also, have you given up on the idea of the technological space or the internet or whatever as this kind of possible for a public commons that would be useful, or have you given up on that, or do you think there is still a place for this idea in the future of thinking through technology, I guess?
Yeah, I think this is a really challenging question. You see people like Zeynep Tufekci talking about Twitter and tear gas and the importance for social media as an organizing platform. And again, I think this is sort of the best case scenario, where you use the internet as a place to gather people together, but then to go and do stuff offline. And it's again that we've sort of severed that part of it, right? So that if everyone just retweets the same hashtag, that's your advocacy now. So I remember in the early 90s getting excited by AOL Messenger and IRC chat and trying to use this to meet girls, but again to meet them offline. So the idea that you would not have an online only relationship. That seemed absurd, right? Everything was about let me get your number, let me find out a place where we can meet up. But again, this idea that to the extent that relationships can come and go without ever having met, and that you can be not just romantically involved but politically involved without having ever met each other. I think it's again important to constantly remind people that Cartesian dualism didn't go away. Just because philosophers say, oh no, we know we're embodied subjects, that's not how the internet works. The internet is very Cartesian. So again, if we're going to take seriously that we're embodied, that what it means to be human is to be embodied, then we cannot treat the internet as a public forum in any real sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And I guess it goes back to this question of individualism that you were talking about before. And I think maybe it's worth sort of speaking about that. I mean, you finished this article, you were just talking about Hannah Arendt and the her kind of concept of individualism, and how, it was in relation to the Zoom point that you've made, that what's actually scarier is not that we were able to, we so quickly give up on, public life and suddenly start going on Zoom during the coronavirus pandemic, but that in effect, this kind of individualism that this embodies has got a much longer history, right? The groundwork was already done for us to retreat from these public spaces with political power or potential political power, and retreat into this kind of individualism. So, I wonder if it's worth you just saying something about Arendt's concept of individualism in particular, because you don't just mean this in the sense of Thatcher and individualism or whatever, looking after number one. There's something more specific to this kind of concept of individualism, right?
Yeah, it's important for Hannah Arendt, this idea that what we call common sense, she takes back again to the Greek concept of sensus communis, and this idea that all of us have limited perception of reality, and that the only way to overcome our limitations is by actually coming together, literally coming together, and sharing our limited perceptions with each other. And then again, that for her, this is what politics was for the Greeks, that we would come and share our views of reality, and sort of battle about, but also add them together, take away, add. That this was politics, sort of coming to some sort of common view, in a literal sense, of what reality is. It was not, as she puts very clear, it wasn't meant to be just determining taxes and deciding who gets punished and who gets rewarded. So again, the very things that politics has been reduced to, and thus this is what she calls bureaucratization, right? So she was way ahead of the curve on algorithmic governance. So she was already alarmed in the 1950s about the degree to which bureaucracy is taking over politics, and statistics was taking over politics. So she was already aware of this idea of, the leveling down, the averaging. She was becoming increasingly Nietzschean in the sense of this idea of, trying to make everything manageable and then giving it to managers. And it was seen as freedom, not to do politics, but to be as far away from politics as possible, and to just engage in, again, everything Marx said it means to be alienated. That became what's freedom.
Yeah, the humans definitely disappeared. I think you said something about statistics, right? Overcoming this kind of coming together and expanding of ourselves by physically bringing our limited knowledge and expanding that limited knowledge. And I think this idea that math is truth and rationality is best, right? It's like very pervasive ideologically, and everything that you figure out rationally needs mathematical proof, because math is truth, rationality isn't truth, right? So I think that is a big uphill battle to climb. In the 50s, statistics were important, but now with data science being such a massive field where people, value data scientists and how can I get this person to do this? How can I categorize this person? How can, it's like, okay, you got your single moms, you got your working people, you got your alcoholics. What are other useful categories that we can sell you things, right? Math and statistics seems like such a theme of the 21st century, right? And a dehumanizing theme, because it isn't about the proof is not I've brought my limited self to the public sphere and now I'm sublating TM. Not TM. I'm sublating and my knowledge is expanding and we're becoming a community, but rather it's like, it'd be really smart is if you could predict which store I'd buy the bag of Cheetos and how you could get me to do that. That's what knowledge really is important, right? It's not that hard to get me to buy some Cheetos, quite frankly.
Well, this is sort of the irony of even individualism, right? Is that it's de-individualized the individual at the same time, so that I do not interact with an individual, I interact with a category, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's all about, again, as Lowell warned, that our sense of what it means to be an individual is a technological one. So that again, I'm constantly trying to classify what category do you fit into, so I know how to deal with you, right? So again, it's this idea that if we were to live up to the name individualism, it would actually be a far better world than the one we're really in.
Right.
Yeah, no, go on, Eliot. Yeah, carry on.
Individualism is quite an important topic for myself. I've never brought this up on the show before, but I wrote an entire book on egoism, right? In terms of disembodied egoism and ideals and what does the self mean? What does self-interest mean? And this is like, but there is limits to when you, how do people kind of try to engage with the world by creating interpersonal spaces via categories. I am this, but also I am an idea, but also I am I have some sort of expertise, right? There's lots of ways we try to overcome individual nature. And I think post-phenomenology is interesting in terms of, well, what are the limits of this? Right, because it really seems like your writing is focused on what are the limits where we can't just flow into these ideas, right? Ultimately, something determines us. We're kind of the blight of determinacy, but also the determinate technology as well, right?
Yeah, this is what I find fascinating reading, for example, Zuboff's Surveillance Capitalism, right? This idea that tech companies are taking over, they're surveilling us, they're trying to predict and control. And again, this idea that much like we said with deepfakes, this again sort of arose our attention and then disappears. Because again, I find this when I teach as well. I say to students, "Do you think privacy still exists?" And they're all like, "No, of course not." And this does not bother them in the slightest, right? It's just sort of taken for granted. And it's again this idea that if you say to someone, you're being surveilled by companies all the time trying to get you to eat nachos, they're like, yeah, okay. So again, this idea of Eric Fromm again was already telling us about escape from freedom 70 years ago, and I think a lot of people read that as like, oh, really? Great. Can't wait.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing that was occurring to me while you guys were talking there is that how weird it is that we do get this sense of individualism from technology, but we started by talking about the deep fakes and how basically there's this kind of complete erasure of the individual in technology. So it's paradoxically both, isn't it? It's
dare I say it's dialectical.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting, and I think one thing I just in sort of conclusion really is that we started off by talking about these articles and this kind of question of what are these technologies doing, right? What role does deepfakes, Zoom play, etc. But to understand them, you really do need a proper kind of theory of capitalism, and I think your work, Nolen, really does do that. I mean, it really explains or offers a possible way of thinking about where we're at with this kind of contemporary moment in capitalism, where technology and technological platforms have, yes, as Zuboff would say, taken over a share of the power, but not in the way that you would expect or is often spoken about in the media, right? These are not overlords controlling the future of society, but there is significant shifts in the way we relate to each other and to questions of power and communal power, which have been heralded by these technologies nevertheless. And I think that thinking through those is really important. So I find your arguments on this and a couple of things from this discussion in particular just completely convincing, really. It's great.
Yeah. Well, there has to be a desire that these tech companies are responding to, right? They're not inventing it. They're making it worse. They're exploiting it, but they're not inventing it.
Yeah, no, exactly. No, it's
expanding
great.
Virtual connectedness and expanding actual isolation. Yeah. I do get that sense, especially because I work from home, and you get and I think, well, I am physically in this room, and this thought comes up quite often, which is like, I'm doing these things, I'm saying these things, but I am here, and like, what's the significance of that? And I think I appreciate you giving me somewhat of an answer to that, which is like, right, limited. We are limited. We come together in a public space, and this creates a sort of community, right? That's what's kind of gone away.
I always try to tell people I'm not ever claiming to be above what I describe, right? That I'm the Freudian defining my own disease in the public sphere. So I am as nihilistic as everything I describe, and I'm just trying to understand basically my own problems to the degree that they are shared by other people.
Right.
Great. No, thanks so much. I
appreciate that.
Yeah, me too.
Wounded healer.
Yeah.
No, something wounded. I don't know what the phenomenologist version of that.
I'm the sick doctor.
The sick doctor.
Yeah, well, on that note, I mean, thanks so much for doing it, Nolen, and everyone I'm sure will want to check out. I think Nihilism is the MIT Press one, actually, and Technology and Nihilism was just a year or so before that with Roman Littlefield. That's the yellow cover behind you. And then there's Nihilism. Both those books really deal with these kind of issues as well. So I'm sure people will check them out. And thanks so much for joining us. And have a good weekend, everyone.
Thanks.